They didn't just hurt you. They made you doubt your own mind, your memory, your instincts, even your sense of self. You began to wonder if you were too sensitive, if maybe you were the problem. But something inside you kept whispering, "This isn't right." That quiet discomfort wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. Because when you're dealing with a narcissist, the damage goes deeper than emotion. It touches your very identity. This isn't just deception, it's distortion. Not a relationship, but a slow, quiet struggle for control. And if you don't see it clearly, you don't just lose the connection. You risk losing yourself. What looks like quirky behavior or mood swings are often deliberate strategies, not always conscious, but effective. If you don't learn to recognize the pattern, to stay grounded in clarity rather than reaction, your peace will erode, quietly, gradually, and they'll still be smiling. That's why we need to approach this with emotional intelligence, not vengeance, with clarity, not chaos, with stoic insight, not to shame, but to understand and protect your boundaries. In this video, we'll explore 5 subtle but powerful behaviors that reveal the truth behind the charm. Because the first step to freedom is naming what's been quietly disorienting you all along. Let's begin. At first glance, the narcissist seems confident, composed, magnetic, always in command. They don't appear to want validation, they expect it. But this isn't true confidence. It's a performance, compensation, not character. Beneath the surface is often an unresolved wound, a deep fear of inadequacy masked by superiority. A child who learned, "If I'm not loved for who I am, I'll be admired for who I pretend to be." So the mask is built of strength, of certainty, of dominance. Not because they feel powerful, but because feeling powerless is intolerable. This is where Stoicism offers perspective. Seneca wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the one who craves more, who is poor." The narcissist craves endlessly, attention, control, praise, not because they are full, but because they are empty. What they seek isn't connection, it's control, and control becomes a way to quiet the panic within. You'll notice, they don't engage as equals. They measure people by usefulness. Can you elevate their image? Can you make them feel superior? Then you're kept close. For now. But if your quiet confidence threatens their illusion, if your truth reflects back anything less than perfection, they don't see you as human. They see a threat, and threats must be silenced. This is where emotional clarity matters. You're not dealing with someone who's just self-centered. You're dealing with someone who will distort reality to maintain control. If you set a boundary, they accuse you of overreacting. If you speak your truth, they shift the blame. If you walk away, they punish through silence, gossip, or guilt. But know this, it's not about you. It never was. And once you see that clearly, once you stop trying to win their approval, you begin to reclaim something far more important. Yourself. It never was about you. They are at war with themselves. You were just caught in the crossfire. So how do you protect yourself? You don't fight fire with fire. You draw boundaries, not from rage, but from clarity. You remind yourself, I am not here to manage someone else's insecurity. I am here to protect my peace. You stop chasing their approval. You stop trying to prove your worth. Because if someone can only respect you when you're beneath them, it's not your presence that's the problem, it's their fear. A real-world example. You work with someone who constantly interrupts, dismisses your ideas, takes credit for your work, and mocks you when you stay silent. They don't want dialogue, they want dominance. And if you call it out calmly, they act shocked, hurt, defensive, not because you were cruel, but because you disrupted the illusion. The narcissist can't admit fault, because doing so would shatter the very mask they depend on. And they would rather fracture the relationship than face the truth beneath it. So what's the Stoic strategy? Stay centered. Stay sovereign. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." You don't have to retaliate. You don't need to prove. You observe. You stay grounded. And in that silence, their instability is revealed. Because when you stop reacting, they lose control. And when control slips, the mask begins to crack. Yes, they wear a smile, but behind it is survival. A narcissist doesn't project confidence because they feel strong. They project confidence because the alternative, being seen, truly seen, is unbearable. They weren't born this way. Many grew up in homes where love was conditional, where mistakes were punished, not forgiven. And somewhere in that chaos they learned, to be safe, I must be perfect. To be valued, I must perform. So the mask was built, not to deceive others, but to protect the fragile self beneath. But here's the truth. The stronger the mask, the more fragile the person wearing it. They may seem composed, charming, admired, but underneath, shame. Deep, unresolved shame. And they can't afford to feel it. So they chase status, control, constant validation. Because the moment the applause stops, the mask begins to crumble. That's why even gentle criticism feels like an attack. You say, "That hurt me." They hear, "You're worthless." What's a conversation to you is a threat to them. And threats must be neutralized, not processed. So they rewrite the story. "You're too sensitive. That never happened. You're making things up." It's not just denial, it's defense. Because if the truth gets in, the mask comes off. And they won't let that happen. In public, they may appear gracious, even humble. In private, they become cold, controlling. Because those closest to them see through the cracks. And that makes you dangerous. Here's the paradox. The more emotionally intimate you become, the more they pull away or strike. Because true intimacy requires authenticity. And they can't offer what they've buried. You may wonder, why did someone who once adored me now seem to resent me? Why did they once lift me up, only to tear me down? Because you saw too much. The fear behind the anger, the shame behind the ego, the pattern beneath the performance. And to a narcissist, awareness is a threat. Not because you're cruel, but because you can see clearly. True story. A woman supported her partner for years, through every challenge, every milestone. But the moment she began to shine, when she was praised, promoted, admired, he didn't celebrate her. He criticized. He didn't support her. He disappeared. Why? Because her light made his mask feel even more hollow. This isn't love. It's emotional control wrapped in affection. Not partnership, but possession. A narcissist's deepest fear isn't being alone. It's being seen. Seen for who they truly are. Not the charm, not the persona, but the scared, unhealed self beneath it all. And the tragedy? That self could have been healed. But they chose control over connection, image over intimacy, power over peace. They don't want love. They want dominance, and they disguise it well. In the beginning, it feels like magic. They shower you with attention, admiration, affection, intensely, obsessively. But it's not about you. It's about attachment. It's bait. Once you're hooked, the game shifts. They get irritated when you act independently. They guilt you when you spend time elsewhere. They make subtle jokes about your friends, your family, your dreams. Little by little, your confidence is chipped away. And all the while they whisper, "I only act this way because I love you." But real love doesn't restrict you. It liberates you. It celebrates your growth. It doesn't punish your independence. It honors it. Control isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, subtle, psychological. They won't always yell, but they will manipulate. They'll use guilt as a tool. twist your empathy into obligation. If you loved me, you'd call back sooner. I guess your friends matter more than I do. You've really changed? Each phrase, a seed of self-doubt. And the more you doubt yourself, the more control they gain. Until one day, you stop trusting your own mind. That's when the real prison forms, not around you, but within you. You stay silent to keep the peace. But silence is not peace, it's consent. Epictetus warned, "He who is enslaved to another's opinion is not free." And that's what narcissists seek, not just your attention, but your identity. They want your sense of self to rise and fall based on their mood, so your worth becomes theirs to grant or take away. Here's the hardest truth. The more loyal you are, the more they test you. Not to build trust, but to tighten control. They create chaos not by accident, but to see how much you'll tolerate. Because the more you bend, the more powerful they feel. But the Stoics remind us, no one can harm you unless you consent. Marcus Aurelius. And that consent doesn't always look like agreement. Sometimes it's staying silent, making excuses, remaining in a place that shrinks you, even when your soul begs you to leave. Real love doesn't ask you to shrink. It invites you to expand. It doesn't demand submission. It respects strength. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is walk away. One more explanation, one more chance. You owe yourself peace. Your silence isn't an act of revenge. It's a quiet declaration. It says, "You no longer get to define my worth. You no longer get to twist my truth. You no longer get to confuse control with care. Not here, not anymore." And once that truth settles in, the walls that held you start to crumble. Because they were never real. They were made of stories, stories you've now outgrown. A narcissist's power doesn't come from how loud they are. It comes from how deeply they can pull you into their chaos. That's the trap, subtle, quiet, and often unnoticed. They don't just insult, they provoke. They push where it hurts, distort your words, bring up old wounds, especially when you're vulnerable. And when you finally react, when you raise your voice, when you cry, when you break, they step back, compose themselves, and say, "See? Look at you. You're the unstable one." Suddenly, you're not defending your truth. You're defending your sanity. This isn't just conflict. It's manipulation by design. It's called reactive abuse, a tactic where you're provoked into a reaction, and then that reaction is used against you. They provoke, they record, they deny, and then they play innocent, because in the court of public perception, appearances matter more than truth. If they can keep their mask clean while painting you as emotional or unstable, they win. But this is where Stoic philosophy hands the power back to you. Marcus Aurelius said, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke." Your greatest battleground is not the argument, it's your reaction, and your greatest weapon is emotional intelligence. They want you to react, because a reaction proves they still have emotional influence. You could be completely right, completely justified, but in their narrative, your tone becomes the weapon. Your emotion becomes the evidence. And worst of all, they remember it. They bring it up weeks later. "Remember when you yelled? You're always overreacting. You're too much. I can't talk to you when you're like that." And suddenly you feel ashamed, not because you were wrong, but because you gave them something to twist. This is where the Stoic finds the deeper truth. Power doesn't lie in saying more. It lies in needing to say less. They want emotion, because emotion can be redirected, reframed, weaponized. If you're sad, they get to rescue you. If you're angry, they get to play the victim. If you're unsure, they get to be the authority, even if it's a lie. But if you're calm, composed, steady. If you don't rise, don't chase, don't react, they lose their grip. Because a narcissist doesn't just feed off praise, they feed off energy, positive or negative. But silence? Silence is starvation. So how do you break the cycle? You master the art of non-reaction, not by suppressing your truth, but by pausing long enough to respond from clarity, not emotion. You train your nervous system to breathe, to pause, to step back. This is not emotional suppression, it's emotional discipline. It's self-regulation. It's the foundation of inner strength. You're not denying how you feel. You're simply choosing not to be controlled by it. You're saying, I feel everything, but I owe you nothing. Non-reaction is not weakness, it's power, calm, conscious, and controlled. Because when you stop explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you, you stop playing a game you were never meant to win. You rise. Not because the chaos doesn't affect you, but because it no longer defines you. And here's the paradox. Your silence, your calm, your refusal to be shaken, says the one thing they fear most, that they no longer have power over you, that you're no longer afraid of being misunderstood. And that is true freedom, that you no longer need to prove your worth to anyone unwilling or unable to see it. Let them shout. Let them twist the story. Let them bait you into reaction. You stay still, because real strength doesn't argue for recognition. It doesn't chase to be understood. It simply walks away, quietly, peacefully, with its dignity intact. And in that moment, you've done what no amount of defending or explaining could ever do. You've exposed the truth without saying a word. One of the most subtle and damaging tools a narcissist uses is projection. They don't just lie. They reverse the roles. They project their own behavior onto you. They call you manipulative, while twisting your words behind the scenes. They say you're selfish, when all you've done is set a boundary. They accuse you of being too emotional, right after they've pushed you past your breaking point. This isn't just miscommunication, it's strategy. A slow, deliberate erosion of your self-trust. One accusation at a time. And if you're not deeply anchored in your own truth, you can start to believe it. That's the danger. Not the words themselves, but the way they make you question your integrity, your memory, your motives. This isn't simply a flaw in character. It's a defense mechanism, a tactic that works. Because narcissists fear something more than being wrong, being seen. So rather than reflect inward, they attack outward. They cast their shadow onto others so they don't have to face it themselves. This is psychological projection, and it's one of the most toxic forms of emotional abuse. They can't carry their guilt, so they hand it to you. They can't hold their shame, so they name it yours. And they're often so convincing that even you begin to wonder if they're right. This is where Stoicism and emotional intelligence intersect. Epictetus said, "Not everything that enters the mind should be accepted, especially not from someone who benefits from your confusion. You don't need to absorb every judgment. You don't need to answer every accusation, because the narcissist's goal is rarely understanding. It's hesitation. It's getting you to doubt yourself, to explain, to justify, to apologize for things you didn't do. And once you start doing that, once you enter the ring, they've already won. Because now you're defending against a lie. And in that game, the rules are not built for truth. They're built for control. So what's the alternative? Don't fight projection with proof. Fight it with clarity. Clarity doesn't argue. It doesn't plead. It knows. I am not what they say I am. Proof assumes the other person wants resolution. But a narcissist isn't seeking peace. They're seeking reaction. And the more calmly you withhold that reaction, the less power they hold. Because in the end, it's not the accusation that breaks you. It's whether or not you believe it. They want you unsettled. They want you questioning yourself. Because when you're spinning, they're steady and in control. But when you remain calm, when you see the pattern for what it is, you silently dismantle their influence. This is where the Stoic mindset becomes your quiet armor. When someone accuses you of something you didn't do, pause and ask yourself, is this truly who I am, or who they need me to be so they don't have to face themselves? That's radical self-awareness. It's not ego, it's discipline, the kind that doesn't flinch in the face of distortion. You stop trying to convince them of your integrity. You start protecting your peace. You stop fighting for validation. You start trusting that clarity doesn't require consensus. Projection reveals far more about the one projecting than the one receiving. When they call you manipulative, they show you how they think. When they accuse you of selfishness, they're exposing their own scarcity. It's not your character on display, it's theirs. And the moment you recognize this, you stop trying to fix the story. You step out of the illusion and stand in truth. Here's your Stoic response. Not silence as avoidance, not explanation as defense, but presence. Presence is knowing who you are without the need to announce it. It's standing still when others try to pull you off center. It's understanding that real clarity doesn't raise its voice. When they throw accusations, you remain steady. When they twist your words, you return to stillness. When they insist you are the problem, you respond, not with anger, but with peace. That kind of peace disrupts their need for chaos. This is self-mastery. This is emotional intelligence. And this is how you dissolve projection, without ever needing to argue. So next time someone tries to hand you a mask that belongs to them, don't wear it. Don't explain it. Just hand it back. With calm, with clarity, with unshakable self-respect. Because when you refuse to carry someone else's darkness, you quietly invite them to face their own. And that's something they've spent a lifetime avoiding. One of the most disorienting parts of narcissistic behavior is the split between public charm and private cruelty. In public, they're magnetic, generous, funny, admired. They know how to impress, how to flatter, how to perform. People like them. People trust them. And that's the point. Because behind closed doors, it's different. Where once there was warmth, there is cold. Where there was support, there is silence or control. Where there was kindness, there are quiet jabs and backhanded compliments. This contrast is not accidental. It's intentional. It's designed to discredit you if you ever speak up. They speak highly of you in subtle, cutting ways. She's great, just a bit too sensitive. He's smart, just not the best with emotions. On the surface, it sounds like praise. But it's a script, calculated to shape how others see you, so that if you ever share your truth, you look irrational, unstable, or ungrateful. This is how narcissists create a cage that looks like care, a prison dressed like a palace. The Stoics warned us of this long ago. It is not what a man says that shows his character, but what he does when no one is watching. Epictetus. Their kindness, in many cases, isn't rooted in virtue. It's rooted in performance. It's not generosity, it's strategy. And behind that carefully curated charm can be a very different reality. One of gaslighting, coldness, manipulation, and control. Not always loud, not always obvious, but consistent, quiet, wearing you down piece by piece. And perhaps the most damaging part of all is what it does to you. Because everyone else sees the light, only you see the shadow. And so you start to wonder, is it me? Am I too sensitive? Too demanding? Too dramatic? That's exactly where they want you. Isolated, second-guessing, grateful for breadcrumbs, and apologizing for needing more. But here's what must be remembered. Love without respect is not love. It's control dressed as care. And if someone only shows you kindness when others are watching, that's not love. That's branding. They're not loving you. They're curating an image. And the Stoic in you must learn to look beyond appearances. Because charm in public means little if, behind closed doors, you feel anxious, dismissed, or small. Real character is steady. It doesn't perform. It doesn't build you up in front of others, just to tear you down in private. It stays aligned, whether seen or unseen. So how do you free yourself from this emotional trap? Not through confrontation, not by trying to expose them. Here's the quiet truth. People tend to believe the person who seems calm, not the one defending themselves. And narcissists understand this well. That's why they provoke you in private, so you'll react in public. Then they stay composed, and you look unstable. It's a pattern they've mastered. But your power doesn't lie in proving the truth. It lies in living it, calmly, consistently, without apology. You don't have to match their performance. You don't have to speak louder than their lies. You need just one thing: integrity. The kind that says, I will no longer explain what you already know. I will no longer perform for those who benefit from my pain. That's quiet confidence. That's emotional intelligence. And that's how you begin to reclaim your self-worth. A final reflection for this chapter. If someone treats you like royalty in public, but like a burden in private, that isn't love, it's strategy. Don't fall for the performance. Stand with your truth, even if it means standing alone for a while. Because the clarity that comes from no longer being confused about who they are is far more freeing than the comfort of pretending they love you. Here's one of the most subtle and dangerous moves in the narcissist playbook. They don't demand that you cut people off. That would be too obvious. Instead, they chip away at your relationships, quietly, strategically. A comment here, a doubt there. I just don't think your friend really supports you. Your family doesn't understand us. You act different when you're around them. At first, it sounds like concern, even flattery. You think, they just care about me. But gradually, your circle shrinks. Your world gets smaller, and the only voice left is theirs. The Stoics warned us about this long ago. Seneca wrote, "Associate with those who will make you better. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve." A narcissist fears exactly that. People who strengthen you, people who bring clarity, people who remind you of who you were before the confusion. So they isolate you, not from love, but from fear. And it's not always physical. Sometimes it's emotional. You're allowed to see your friends, but afterwards, there's tension. You're made to feel guilty. Affection is withdrawn. An argument starts. Eventually, you begin avoiding those moments, not because of your friends, but because you're exhausted by the aftermath. That's not partnership. It's psychological imprisonment. This tactic works especially well on those with empathy. You don't want to upset anyone. You're loyal. You try to keep the peace. And slowly, without even realizing it, you begin to shrink yourself to avoid friction. You begin compromising to preserve calm. But this is why the Stoic must stay awake. Someone who truly loves you will never need to control your connections. They will encourage your friendships, celebrate your mentors, support your independence, because only those insecure in themselves need to keep others small to feel safe. And yes, realizing you've been isolated is painful. You might ask yourself, why didn't I see this sooner? How did I let it happen? But that's not weakness. That's awakening. Emotional manipulation is rarely loud. Sometimes it sounds like love. And that's what makes it so difficult to name. So how do you return to yourself? Not with rage, not with confrontation, but by reconnecting with yourself and with those who see you clearly. Call the friend you pulled away from. Visit the mentor you stopped talking to. Reach out. Rebuild. Not just for comfort, but to reclaim your identity. Because narcissists don't just isolate you from others. They isolate you from yourself. And the Stoic path forward is this: restore your boundaries. Reignite your independence. Remember who you were before they made you forget. Your silence isn't just a rejection of their control. It's a quiet return to your own voice. You don't owe loyalty to someone who used love as leverage. You owe it to yourself to be surrounded by those who build, not break, especially not in the name of care. A final reflection for this chapter. If someone in your life makes you feel like everyone else is the problem, pause and look closer. It may not be everyone else, because anyone who truly respects your growth will celebrate your connections, not sabotage them behind subtle doubts and sideways remarks. And anyone who isolates you in private often fears the version of you that stands strong in public. Why? Because if they can influence your memory, they can influence your mind. That's the nature of gaslighting, one of the most damaging forms of psychological manipulation. It doesn't begin with shouting. It starts with a question, a comment, a shift in tone. You remember something painful. They say, "That never happened." You share how something made you feel. They say, "You're being dramatic." You express confusion or hurt, and you're met with, "You can't take a joke." Little by little, the certainty you once had begins to blur. This isn't accidental. It's not misunderstanding. It's confusion by design. Over time, it becomes harder to trust your own thoughts. You hesitate before speaking. You second-guess your memory. You feel like you're constantly explaining yourself, but you're never really heard. This isn't just manipulation. It's something deeper. It's cognitive theft. Because the moment they get you to question what you saw, what you felt, they can reshape the narrative however they want. And in that new version, they are the calm, reasonable one. You are the unstable one. They don't need to raise their voice. They just need you to doubt yourself. And once that seed is planted, you'll do the rest of the silencing on your own. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." But what happens when those thoughts no longer feel like your own? That's what gaslighting does. It paints your mind with someone else's brush until even your soul forgets its original color. This is where emotional intelligence becomes your quiet armor. When something feels off, ask yourself, is this really what happened, or just what I've been told to believe? Does this behavior reflect the truth I know, or the version they want me to accept? Stoicism teaches that while perception shapes our experience, we are the gatekeepers of that perception, not them, not anyone else. If someone can distort your reality, they can slowly begin to control your peace. And that's why clarity must be protected, sharpened, cultivated, like a blade in the hands of someone who refuses to be fooled again. Here's a real-world example. You are hurt. You bring it up. They respond not with compassion, but with logic, cold, clinical. They twist the sequence of events. Then say, "Why are you still holding on to that?" I already apologized. But they didn't. They only said, "I'm sorry you feel that way." That's not an apology. That's a performance. One that looks noble, but shifts the blame back onto you. This is how gaslighting often hides behind politeness. This is how confusion gets disguised as kindness. Here's the turning point. You don't need them to validate your pain. You don't need them to admit the truth. You need only one thing: to trust your own clarity again. If something felt off, it probably was. If you walked away confused, there's a reason. If your thoughts feel scattered, you may be near someone who needs you disoriented to stay in control. And the moment you see that is the moment your power begins to return. So, What's the Stoic response? Not yelling, not pleading, just anchoring yourself in what's real and refusing to let it be rewritten. You write it down if you need to. You talk to someone you trust. You notice what they said then and what they say now. But above all, you stop debating your truth, because your dignity isn't something that needs defending. It simply needs remembering. And the moment you stop reacting to their version of events, you take back the power they were never meant to hold. Your silence becomes clarity. Your detachment becomes steadiness. And their tactics fall apart. Not because you fought them, but because you simply stopped playing. You've left the stage. You're no longer part of the performance. Final reflection for this chapter. Gaslighting loses its grip the moment you know your own mind. It doesn't work on someone who is rooted in emotional clarity, protected by boundaries, and practiced in choosing peace over provocation. The Stoic doesn't need the world to agree with them. They just need to walk in the truth, even when others mislabel it. That's not madness. That's freedom. They didn't love you. They loved being you. At first, it felt like magic. Someone finally understood you. They shared your values, echoed your passions, reflected your pain. But what felt like deep connection was often something more calculated. Mirroring, not intimacy. Because narcissists don't connect to your soul. They study it, not to appreciate it, but to extract from it. They copy your energy, your language, your rhythm. Not out of love, but to gain your trust. And once it's gained, the shift begins. Warmth turns cold. Admiration becomes control. Because the mimicry was never real. It was a key to the door. This tactic is especially effective against those who lead with openness, the empaths, the emotionally generous. Because you weren't suspicious. You were kind. You weren't guarded. You were honest. But to someone who values control over connection, your openness is simply opportunity. A way in. They use your language to shape a version of you that serves them, subtly shifting your thoughts, challenging your instincts, reshaping your identity in small, persistent ways, until you find yourself unsure of where they end and you begin. But the Stoic sees what's happening, because Stoicism teaches, you become what you repeatedly allow. So the question becomes, what do you allow? Do you allow mimicry to replace authenticity? Do you mistake intensity for intimacy? Are you feeling seen or simply studied? Real life example. You meet someone new. They agree with everything you say. They mirror your story. They speak your language so fluently, it feels like destiny. But within weeks, they begin correcting you, critiquing you, advising you in ways that sound helpful, but feel like control. That's not partnership. That's architecture. They're not connecting with you. They're constructing you. Healthy relationships are built on complementarity, not cloning. On mutual challenge, not quiet submission. They make space for your differences. They don't replace your voice with their own. The Stoic holds their center. They don't reveal their soul too soon. They observe before they trust. They pause before they share. Not out of fear, but out of self-respect. Because boundaries are not walls. They are filters, letting in clarity, keeping out chaos. So if someone seems to only love the parts of you they can copy, protect your uniqueness like sacred ground, because it is. Detachment isn't coldness. It's discernment. It's knowing your light is not for everyone and should never be used to cast someone else's shadow. Final reflection. True connection requires two whole people, not one person being rewritten to fit another's script. So when someone feels too perfect, too fast, ask, do they love you? Or do they love who they get to become by being near you? Do you feel more like yourself with them, or less? A narcissist mirrors to manipulate, but the Stoic mirrors the truth, and stands in it, quiet, steady, whole. And that kind of stillness can't be copied. It can only be earned. So now, your silence says something simple and unshakable. I choose peace over dysfunction. Not out of bitterness, not to punish, but because you finally understand what deserves your energy and what doesn't. You no longer respond just because someone demands it. You no longer explain yourself just because they're uncomfortable. And that restraint? It's not weakness. It's maturity. It's spiritual discipline. Real example. You step away from a family member who constantly crosses your boundaries. No angry speech. No dramatic goodbye. Just space. They react. They call you selfish. They try to guilt you. They stir others to question your silence. But you don't respond. And that, more than anything, unsettles them. Because control requires access. And you've quietly closed the door. In Stoic thought, silence is never empty. It's full of meaning if you've done the inner work. Marcus Aurelius said, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke." Silence is how you revoke that power. It says, "You no longer get to define my experience." And when you reach that point, something shifts. You become untouchable. Let's be clear. Silence isn't about cutting people off. It's about cutting off the power they once held over your nervous system, your peace, your sense of self. You no longer react. You no longer explain. And in that stillness, their tactics lose traction. Their guilt trips don't land. Their chaos doesn't stir you. Their mask cracks. But no one's watching. Just you. Free, finally. This is the final stage of detachment. You don't need them to understand. You don't need closure. Because the moment you stop needing their validation, you reclaim your mind. It's not detachment from the person. It's detachment from the illusion that you ever owed them your peace. That's not bitterness. That's clarity. And clarity is more powerful than revenge. Final reflection. When they speak badly of you, stay quiet. When they provoke, stay grounded. When they miscast you as the villain, let them. You don't owe the world your defense. The truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs time. And in time, silence always reveals who people really are. Let them unravel. Let them spiral into the quiet you no longer fill. Because silence, it's not just the absence of words. It's the presence of wisdom. And that is something they'll never quite recover from. There will come a time when your silence is not just a boundary. It's a message, a quiet declaration that says, I don't need to yell to have strength. I don't need to explain to be right. I don't need to react because I've already reclaimed my peace. That's emotional intelligence in motion. That's self-worth, no longer up for debate. That's the kind of stillness that rattles even the loudest chaos. So when they whisper, provoke, accuse, let them. Let the noise echo off your calm. Because the real battle was never between you and them. It was between the version of you that needed to be understood and the version that finally remembered. Freedom doesn't beg. And here's the truth. The less you say, the louder the message. Not in words, but in consequences. Reflection prompt. Who still holds power over you through your reactions? And what would happen if you stopped responding? If this message spoke to something in you, share it with someone still fighting battles that silence could already be winning. And if you're on a path of reclaiming inner peace, subscribe to Stoic Mindset Mastery, where we train the mind to be calm, the spirit to be steady, and the soul to be untouched by noise. Because this isn't just philosophy, it's a blueprint for personal power. And every day you choose stillness over chaos, their illusion cracks. Just a little more. Stay quiet, stay grounded, stay free.